Good morning everyone, it's Christina from Our Home. I'm taking you on a garden update tour. I know I haven't done that since, what was it, June, July maybe? A lot has happened in the gardens, I just haven't had a chance to film it, so I'm going to take you around and show you what's been going on. Right now we're at the last week of August, so things definitely look a lot different than last time I showed you. So let's get started. This is one of the patio planters. I had 4 squash plants here. I don't know what happened. They were doing fine, and then all of a sudden they just died almost instantly. These two are a different variety, and this one is not doing very well. It's always been quite small and just the flowers fall off. It doesn't look good. This one was a little bit of a late bloomer, but it is looking good. I thought maybe those 2 squash plants had died because they were just at the end of their season, but I don't think they were, because I planted all 4 of these plants at the exact same time. And they are different types of zucchini. I think I was saying squash, but I meant to say zucchini. So they were all zucchini, just slightly different varieties. So like I said, don't know what's going on. I have some tomatoes in here. They're still small, but they're doing okay. These are the plants I took out from the main veggie garden. That one's got a little tomato. I've got some marigold here as well. Hasn't bloomed yet, but there's still time. These are scarlet runner beans. I kind of expected them to do a lot better than they did, but it didn't really spread very much, and there wasn't a huge yield of beans, which was pretty disappointing. I think when I picked this clean, there were still some beans that weren't quite mature, but I'm having a hard time finding them now. This is the first year I've actually started weighing my harvest, so I can see how much we actually get. And I'm realizing I don't get as much as I thought I did with pretty much everything I plant, so I'm going to have to sow a lot more seeds next year for everything. On this side were the snow peas, which are all pretty much done. I think there might be a couple little pods left. Oh yeah, there's some down there. I should pick those for the seeds. I'll come out and do that later. But yeah, they were climbing up here and I just pulled them down when I was harvesting the seeds. I've got some dill, self-seeded. I just let it go. I didn't bother trimming it or picking it to dry because I still have a ton of dill in the pantry. I have not weeded any of the gardens in a while because once the flowers started coming out, there were so many bees all over pretty much every single plant in all my gardens, and I am allergic to stings, so I don't take any chances around bees or wasps or anything that could potentially kill me. So I just stayed away from all the gardens, not even weeding, because they were just not safe for me personally. And then once the flowers started closing up and falling off, turning into fruit, my allergies started, and it's very difficult to be outside during allergy season. So the gardens are a little neglected, but this is real life. I want to show you guys what it looks like. It's not always Instagram perfect, and that's okay. So this row is carrots. I think it's just all orange carrots. I've tried thinning it out a bit, and I'm just going to use the little tiny carrots in vegetable stock. Over here is more carrot. I think these are heirloom multicolored, but I don't remember. I have a lot of tomato plants in here, and I've had to start tying them up because they're getting pretty floppy. And as you can see, I've been harvesting a lot of tomatoes. There's more tomatoes on the other side, but I'll just show you this side first. Here is a row of parsnip. Interesting how these plants down here are so much taller than the ones at the other end. I'm not sure why. I'm just gonna let those go until I guess the tops die. Last year I had to pick the parsnips pretty early because something was digging them up and I didn't want to lose them. More tomatoes here. I've been picking them from this section as well. They're doing pretty well. They're not huge, but even when they're small, they still have a lot of fruit on them, which is pretty cool. They're definitely planted too close together, but I wasn't sure if they would survive, so I just kind of put them in here and let them do their thing. Lots of marigold as well. In hindsight, I probably should have planted those in front of the tomatoes because then I'd actually be able to see them, but that's okay. I've been cutting these and drying them for tea. Over here I had cucumber. This is the only plant that survived, and it only had one cucumber so far and it was not edible. So I don't really know what's going on. We've got some, looks like flowers wanting to start. I don't know if they'll actually bloom in time. And I decided to sow some more cucumber seeds. As I said, we're at the end of August, so I don't know if we'll have time for these to mature and actually develop vegetables, but we'll see. I don't know what's going on with my acorn squash. No idea. I planted so many seeds and they were doing really well. The plants were really nice and healthy, like this one. The leaves look great. It had a ton of flowers and fruit was starting to develop. And then all of a sudden, this happens. There's a little squash that isn't going to mature. Here's another one. It's very small. You can't eat that. And I don't know what happened. Here are my giant parsnips from last year that I forgot. I didn't see them actually. They just were hidden and they came back in full force. I saved the seeds from these. I wasn't able to get all of them. A lot of them fell into the garden, so I'm sure I'll be finding parsnips popping up next year. Here is my row of tomatoes. It's all doing fairly well. Good harvest on each side, so I'm happy about that. Here's the lettuce that it's just, I don't know what it's doing. I feel like this is a good size to eat it, but it tastes so bad. There's another little clump, and I know this has bolted, so it's not good. I'm gonna try a different variety next year, I think. All right, let's go look at a different garden. I think it's a little hard to see because of the bright sun, but I've got some celery back there. I have 3 plants, but only this one is doing well. And I'm not really sure when it's good to harvest it because it does not look like the celery from the grocery store. And it is grocery store celery. But marigold, I should probably cut back this rhubarb because it's just taking over, which is okay, but I don't want it to be shading out anything else. Here is a bunch of cabbage. Again, it's kind of hard to see. I don't know if this cabbage cover was in the last video. David made it for me, and I think it was user error on my part because the goal is to keep cabbage moths out, but they were still able to get in because the screen that we used wasn't perfectly sealed. So they were able to crawl down inside and eat my cabbages. So I kind of went crazy and used a ton of clear caulking to try to glue these down. And I don't think that really worked because I still was finding cabbage moths or caterpillars in there. And I also found a bunch of slugs, which is disgusting. And since I buried this cover a few inches deep, I didn't really want to be digging it up and pulling out bugs often. So I've just kind of given up on this garden. And if things get all my cabbages, so be it, but I'm hopeful I'll be able to save some. You can kind of see all the damage there. That's from a slug, so that's fun. I know you can use eggshells to deter slugs, but I've got a ton of gardens and they are in every single garden, so that would just be way too many eggshells. And I know you can also use beer traps. I don't really like the idea of buying beer just to feed it to slugs, but I think I'm going to have to. In other news, very tall marigold. It has yet to bloom, but it's pretty close. And my echinacea was so big I had to tether it because it was leaning all the way over into the yard. In this little section, I had planted some beets and I didn't think anything was going to happen. So I sowed some more seeds and it looks like we've got some, but only in that one section. So I planted more seeds in this bald patch and I don't know if we'll get any. This is just really a bad place for a garden. This whole front garden actually is a bad place for a garden because it does not get much sun. And when it rains, it doesn't get much rain either because it's hidden under the overhang of the roof. I think maybe next year I just won't put anything in this little area. Maybe I'll just try to do some herbs because this is even worse than this section. But I'm working with what I have, so can't complain. All right, next garden. This garden is kind of hard to get into frame because I don't want to film my neighbor's yard and we're pretty close to the property line, but I'll do my best. This is my three sisters' garden, which has pumpkins, corn, and beans. I think I talked about how something pulled out all my pumpkin plants earlier in the season, so I had to sow them all over again. And I must have planted 20 pumpkin seeds and I think I got 3 or 4 plants. And it turns out they're all white pumpkins, not orange, which is okay. But again, lots of bees have been coming in to these flowers, which is great, but that means I can't really safely get in here to do any weeding, so it's pretty shrubby under the leaves, but that's okay. And it looks like some of them are starting to die, so I'm not sure if the plant is dying as well, or what's going on, but yeah, there's some dead leaves in here. I've been trying to pull off all the extra flowers because I don't think they'll mature into fruit in time before the frost. So I've been pulling them off if they're not opened yet, if I can safely reach them. I've also been pulling off any pumpkins that are starting to grow in bad places. Like this one is okay because it's inside the fence, but I had one that was poking through the fence trying to grow, and I don't want a pumpkin growing into the yard. I'm trying to get a better shot to show you the pumpkins in there, but it's kind of awkward. Okay, there's one, and then the other 2 over there. Those are really the only good sized pumpkins. Here is the corn. It's quite tall. I think it's taller than me for the most part. And the cobs are looking great. I did end up coming out here and hand pollinating. So I was cutting off these top little fluffy parts, or they're not even fluffy, they're more like spiky, I guess. So I was cutting these off and then rubbing them on the silks when the cobs were small, and that's supposed to pollinate it and encourage a better sized cob. You don't have to hand pollinate. I chose to because it seemed like there were a lot of stalks that weren't getting pollinated, just because of how the wind blows. So that's what I did. It seemed to be working well. And then over here are all the beans. I've been calling these mystery beans because I don't know what they are. They kind of look like a navy bean once they're shelled. We haven't eaten any yet. I've just been letting them grow and grow, and just recently I picked as many as I could find that were a good size, like bigger than this, and I shelled them and then pressure canned them. But I'll definitely have to get in there and get some more beans. Okay, next garden. This is the main veggie garden, and once again I haven't been able to weed. All of the marigolds are doing well down here. I actually had a different marigold there, and I wondered why it wasn't growing, why it didn't have any flowers. And then I realized it was ragweed, and I was letting ragweed grow in my garden. I'd actually dug it up from a different place in the garden thinking it was a marigold, and I wanted it to be in that spot just to have a nice row. And nope, I had transplanted ragweed, which I'm allergic to, so that's fun. I've also been cutting a lot of these flowers to dry for tea, as well as to dry for seed for next year. I've already picked all the potatoes, which is what this black row is covering. I just wanted to cover the soil so no weeds grew through. Here are just some little onions that I ended up pulling out. They weren't really worth drying, so I'm just gonna put them in the compost pile. This is an onion row, and I've picked most of the onions, but there's still some growing. I ended up having a lot of my onions just not make it. This row was supposed to be all bell peppers, but a lot of those plants didn't make it. So what I ended up doing to fill in the gaps was just pulling out any other tomato plants that I was finding that had just self-sown from last year, and just putting those in the gaps. So you might see some tomato plants just in random places throughout the garden, and that's why. So yeah, I don't know why the pepper plants are doing so poorly. Like, that's just pitiful. The tomato plants here are small because they were just growing from seeds that had fallen, so I don't really have high hopes for most of them, but others are doing pretty well. I think there might actually be some hope for some of these. Oh, I just stepped in a spider web. Some of these pepper plants. Oops, my sunglasses fell out of my pocket. Hopefully these can mature before the frost. And there's more tomato plants here. I need to tether this one up because it's starting to droop over. These plants in the back corner are not doing great. Tomato plants in this little section never really do well. I think maybe it's just too protected, I'm not sure. But then these plants are doing well. I know it's hard to see because they're kind of a jungle, but they've outgrown their cages. They're all crisscrossed and intermingled. I think it's just two different varieties. So it's pretty easy to tell which is which because that's the cherry tomato, and then let me try to find a good ripe purple plum. I can't see one easily, but those are the purple plum, and they end up being a purplish, reddish color. I've only found a few hornworms, and I haven't seen any more so far. I haven't seen any more damage, so I'm hopeful it was just a few hornworms and that I already got them. There's more. This is the Birdhouse Gourd arbor. Here are the plants, or the fruits. They're looking pretty good. One of them already fell off the plant and was just on the ground, but it was definitely not mature, so I'm not sure if that one will actually dry out properly. I'm supposed to just let them dry out on the vine and then pick them, and we can start the curing process to make them into birdhouses. So hopefully we can do that soon, and the plants all make it to full maturity. This is my herb garden. Bet, get out of there. She's not allowed in there, but sometimes frogs hang out in the window well, so that's why she likes to run in and look for them. So I had sunflowers growing here, and then a little chipmunk pulled them all out, so that was pretty annoying. I've got a mystery herb here. I think I mentioned it in my previous video. I'm pretty sure it is summer savory. I think. This is something else. I didn't plant it. It just grows here and I just haven't pulled it out yet. Creeping thyme continues to do well, of course. This garden is definitely shrubby. I've got a lot of calendula growing, which is great. I read that you're supposed to cut off as many of the blooms as possible to encourage more growth. So I've been doing that every time I see some maturing. So I think I'll pull off those two later. They're pretty sticky, so I prefer to cut them off with some scissors instead of my bare hands. And then I'm going to save the dried ones for seed. Over here are some sunflowers. Again, the chipmunk was getting into there, so I had to put our owl as a distraction. I think it worked. Here's some comfrey that just grows everywhere, takes over, and I know it's medicinal, but I don't like it, so I try to pull it out. I'm not going to now because it's kind of bristly and it hurts my hands, so I prefer to do it with gloves on. Here is more mystery herb. I think this might be chamomile, maybe. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it'll even fully mature. Maybe I'll bring it inside before the frost if it's still small. I've marked some calendula plants that grew from fallen seed, and they're still trucking along. More giant dill that's self-seeded. And I can't remember what this is. Oregano. Pretty sure it's oregano. That's doing well. So is the echinacea. I did have to tether it because, again, it was falling over because it was so heavy. I've been cutting off a lot of them for drying to make tea, but I noticed some of them were looking kind of disgusting on the top. I don't know if you can see that very well, but it was like there was mud or dirt or something in it, and I didn't really want to be drying and consuming that, so I just left those gross looking flowers. They can turn to seed for next year. This is my pea planter, PEA, and I did have some spinach growing here, but it was just not doing well, so I just gave up on it and let it die. This is a squash plant, well, a few squash plants. I can't remember what they're called. I think butter bush, maybe? Butter something? These flowers have been pretty destroyed. They've been getting very chewed. I don't know if it's earwigs. I know definitely slugs. I found some slugs on here, which is pretty gross. But I'm hopeful that I'll still get a good harvest from these plants. This is my first time growing this type of squash, so maybe it's not even a good place for it. We'll see. I also had a bunch of Swedish peas in here, hence the name Pea Planters. They've already been harvested. As you can see, the plants have dried out, and I picked all the pods. I know that this plant has a pretty short growing season, and oh, there's an empty pod. So it's got a short growing season, so I wanted to be able to have the most quantity of peas over the summer, so I planted a few extras later in the season so that we can get a second crop. I had to stop filming suddenly because there was a barking dog nearby, and that was really quite loud, messing up my audio. That's pretty much everything in the gardens. It's been an interesting summer, that's for sure. I finally figured out what has been doing all that damage to my squash plants, and it's the squash vine borer. They lay their eggs at the base of the plant or inside the stalk of the plant, and then when those eggs hatch, they eat their way out, destroying the entire plant. I'm already researching ways to prevent this from happening next spring, so hopefully I can get on top of it and save all my squash plants, because as you saw in the video, they were pretty much all destroyed. Shortly after completing this clip, my pumpkin plants were all dying, and I lost all the zucchini plants as well. Pretty disappointing, but now I know what to do for next year. Thank you for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope you consider subscribing as well. Have a great rest of your day.